Good morning, everybody. Today we're talking about, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into the book Don Quixote. And I'm going to tell you, I don't really script these things out because I really kind of want to give you guys like an unfiltered idea. Plus, when I script it out, it really sounds not like me. It just sounds like somebody scripted it out and I'm reading a script. But the hardest part of this is trying to figure out what I would consider like the in of the review because, you know, it's starting that first sentence to try and figure out how to talk about whatever book that I'm talking about. And this one is really hard because Don Quixote is a book that is wildly complex, but also really simple. And it finally clicked with me when I saw another video by the world of Mr. Gray when he was talking about something else and he made a reference to Monty Python. And really, this book, Don Quixote, is sort of like Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's got the same type of wordplay. It's got a plot that really only exists to hang like set pieces on, jokes on. It goes off in different directions. There's entire portions of it where it just starts becoming pages of a different novel for a while. And it's wildly inventive in the way that it strings all of this together. So this book is really going to be difficult to go over in my normal structure of these videos where we talk about plot, then what is it really about, and then do I recommend it. So I'm going to say right now, I fully recommend reading this book. It's a wonderful read, especially if you get the same translation I did. The translation I got was published in 2003, and it actually really captures the tone that I think Cervantes was going for. But so let's actually just talk about the plot. Okay, we'll start out. Well, I'm going to try and do my best to force this book into the structure that I set up here. And we may, the different parts of it may bleed together. So, anyway, what is the plot of this book? Well, an unnamed person. We don't really know his name. We know he's probably somewhat rich, but he's not exactly the richest person in the world or anything like that. But he lives in a province of Spain called La Mancha, and he reads a lot of books about knights and chivalry. And he decides one day that he's going to become a knight errant that roams the land and rights the wrongs. And he's so convinced of this that he's basically, everybody else sees him as crazy. He wanders out to a local inn that in his haze of mind he sees as a castle. He asks the innkeeper to knight him in the morning after standing guard over his like armor all night. And so from that point on, he thinks he's a knight errant. He returns to his homestead after a couple adventures and picks up Sancho Panza as a squire, and they set out to roam around Spain, like I said, righting the wrongs. And one of the more, like I guess you would call it a running joke, is that everybody whose wrong he rights is actually made worse by righting those wrongs. He, the very first person that he meets is a young man that's being whipped by his like employer for not doing well. And Don Quixote says, "Hey, you gotta stop that. You gotta pay him. Then he can go on his way." And then Don Quixote leaves. Turns out later on in the book, we find out that the young man was whipped even more. He ended up going to the hospital. The employer never gave him his wages, and he's now destitute and poor, trying to find somewhere else with horrible scars all over his back. In other ones, in another adventure, he frees people convicted to be galley rowers for a number of years, and they're all horrible criminals that should not have gone free, and they end up causing even more trouble than they were worth. Basically, every single time Don Quixote tries to do something good, he kind of makes it worse. That's the basic plot. I'm not going to go too much farther into it because, like I said, the plot really only exists to string together a few like set pieces of jokes and that kind of stuff. But I really want to talk what this book is truly about. Because, like I said last week, if you read this book, ask yourself if Don Quixote is truly crazy, or if maybe he's the sanest person in Spain. Because here's the thing, Don Quixote at least strikes me as an idealist. He really sees a lack of chivalry within Spain, and so he goes out to correct that problem. He wants to help other people. He wants other people to be better. He doesn't do it for himself. He does it for others. Whether he makes their lives better or not, that's a question. But he's actually got a perfectly great idea. He wants to make other people's lives better, and that's never a bad thing. He goes about it wrong, but he's got a very definite set of ideals that he wants to help and he wants to bring back. And one of the reasons that I think that Don Quixote is actually perfectly sane is he keeps on talking about bringing chivalry back to the world. That tells me that Don Quixote somewhere knows that he's not a knight, that the age of chivalry is over, and that the world has moved on from the Knights of the Round Table. And so that tells me that he's actually as sane as the next person. He is not as crazy as everybody else seems to think he is. I might be wrong on that. I've heard this book be called one of the ultimate Rorschach tests of the of literature, that you see in it what you want to see in it. And I would prefer seeing somebody who's an idealist, who's trying to do good, maybe not doing it correctly, but trying to do good. So that's my take on this. Sancho Panza is considered not being very smart, because Sancho Panza just totally believes he's a knight, and that he's just going along with Don Quixote to try and get something out of it. Sancho Panza wants to be made governor of his own kingdom. And that's another thing I kind of want to touch upon. Don Quixote is an idealist. He's pure. He really wants to do well. Sancho Panza just wants something out of it. And I think that what Cervantes was going for in that dynamic, and I've never really seen this mentioned anywhere else, so I may be wrong, but I think what Cervantes was going for was a parody of how people that try and do good sometimes have hangers-on that don't really care about doing good. They care about getting something out of it. And, it's something to keep an eye on as you read the novel. Sancho Panza really doesn't care about helping others. He just wants to get his power. He sees Don Quixote as a way of gaining wealth and power. And I mean, there is a certain amount of purity to Sancho Panza as well. Sancho Panza wants to help Don Quixote. He's not a horrible person, but he's also not exactly doing this for purely altruistic purposes. And so I like that dynamic. It's really great. So is this book worth reading? Oh my God, yes. Do not read it the way I did. I I read this entire 950-page novel straight through, and within the span of 2 weeks, and I'm not usually that fast of a reader, so that was hard. Um, but the best way to read this is to maybe read 1 or 2 chapters a day. Don't, spread it out over an entire year. Because while I love this novel, and I think that it was remarkably modern in the way that it tells its story, I also think that it's a product of its time in the way that it does that. And I mean, I don't know how many books other people watching this have read from that time period, but they were very talkative back then. They were very there was like a, how shall I put this? There was a unwritten rule that why would you say something in, one sentence when you could take 3 chapters to say it? That kind of a thing. And Cervantes was a contemporary of Shakespeare, actually. Surprisingly enough, they both died within the same year of one another. Anyway, but so I mean, basically, while Shakespeare was playing with the English language a lot more, Cervantes was really defining what the modern novel would be called, because Don Quixote is considered the very first modern novel. So, if you want to see where things came from, you start with Don Quixote, because this is the novel that defined what modern novels would look like. And so just on historical things, everybody should read this novel. But in all honesty, just on, the pure quality of this writing, you should read it. It's really funny. It's got a very Monty Python-esque humor to it. It has a lot of wonderful plays on words. And I should warn you, actually, should also say the best way to read this is on an ebook reader, whether it be a Kindle or a Barnes and Noble Nook or something like that. And that's just because you can highlight a word and say, "Hey, what does this mean?" And it will tell you. And so you'll get some of the puns a lot better that way, unless you're a lot smarter than I am, in which case you'll know it already. But that's it. I really suggest reading this. Just take your time at it. Be prepared to look up things you don't understand. Be aware that there's a cultural context to it that, while it's not directly applicable to modern times, it still echoes things that we will find funny in today's world. So definitely read this book. I loved it. I highly recommend it. Take your time reading it and have fun with it. Stay positive. Bye bye.